Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 36th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in today. My name's Tanmay Bakshi, and as you probably know, at heart, I am a developer, right? And I love to write code. But here's the thing, very similar infrastructure for code that I write can actually look very, very different depending on where it's actually being applied, right? The scale at which I'm actually writing that code. For example, an enterprise likely has very different needs or backends than, for example, a small business would. And a specific area of this infrastructural technology where I think that difference is really visible is cloud computing. Now, for example, I've built many different applications that are powered by IBM's public cloud. But if I'm a bank or maybe an airline, maybe I want to use some of my own infrastructure as well because maybe there's some sort of reliability or security concerns, or maybe there's a regulatory reason behind it. And that has to change the way that I code as a developer. But what if we could somehow abstract that all away and make it easier for me to code as a developer? What kind of impact would that have on the solutions that I could provide or on my company? And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. And we're being joined by a very special guest, IBM Canada Lab Director and the VP of Development for Data and AI at IBM, Stephen Astorino. Now, Steve has years of experience working with technology and years of experience working with specifically cloud technology, and so I can't wait to hear his thoughts on this tech. And so without any further ado, let's welcome Steve to the show. Hi, Steve, how are you?
Hey, Tanmay, how are you?
I'm doing
Great.
I'm doing very well. Thank you for, being on the show today. It's really exciting to have you on. And as a matter of fact, before we get into this world of technology, do you want to start off maybe quickly introducing yourself, telling everyone a little bit more about what you do and how you got here?
Sounds good. And thanks for having me, by the way.
Of course.
So I'm the Vice President of Development for Data and AI. So that's part of my job. And then the other part of my job is also I'm the Canada Lab Director for the Canadian Research and Development Labs within IBM. So very exciting. Both roles are very exciting. On the data and AI side, really concentrating on hybrid cloud, AI, also databases in all kinds of different environments, and most importantly, based on OpenShift, which is the foundation for a hybrid cloud. I know I'm getting into it early, but that's kind of what I do, and then that's my background.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, it's really interesting to hear the kind of technologies you work with and the kind of stuff that you do. But I mean, I feel like let's just sort of dive right into it. Let's start off a little slow though. So I want to know a little bit more. Of course, I'm a developer, so I'm going to start off asking like a more developer-focused question before we get into this world of like hybrid cloud and stuff. Um, so as a developer, why exactly should I care, first of all, about cloud computing technology? To give you a little bit of background, just last week we had Leo Ryder on the show, and he's the CTO at Nimbix, which is a company that does high performance computing technology in the cloud. And we talked about cloud computing, but we talked about it from an HPC perspective, right? High performance compute. We talked about containerization and a lot of those technical details and how that works and stuff. But now, getting a little bit further detached as, say, a developer or as the business hiring that developer, why exactly should I care about cloud computing technology to begin with, and then we'll move into more modern forms of it?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, you should care because that's where everything is going. So as a developer, you should always make sure that you're lined up with where the technology is going. But if we look at the modernization of companies and how they're transforming their businesses, right? The key things that they're driving towards is how do I become cloud native? How do I get my applications on the cloud? So as a developer, it's very critical that you're not only up to speed on those technologies, but also developing applications with that context in mind. And there are a lot of differences as you get down to the nitty gritty of things in terms of how you actually write code. So that's one of the key reasons why you should care. So I mean that is the overall strategy. The other one is from a developer environment and tool set perspective. This is a huge difference. I mean, I remember when I was coding and I needed to set up my laptop or my computer, download all the development environments, or download the programming language, you name it, right? It would be a nightmare to get it up and running. It would take days, sometimes weeks to get it all working. And now it's a click away. You go on the cloud, your environment's set up, it's ready to go, it's ready to integrate. You spin up services in different technologies within seconds. It's huge. It's a huge transformation. So as a developer, it's much easier to get access to the technology and the environments that you need to have this type of impact. So it's really cool.
Right. I mean, of course, developers and really everybody's got to be, on top of what's happening in the industry. I mean, cloud is one of those things where it's not necessarily something that's going to completely change the way that we compute. It already has, right? It's already, pretty much standard and pervasive with everybody. But yeah, no, it's sort of my question, which you did answer, was more around, why exactly is that the case? And I love what you mentioned around being able to just spin up different environments and work with different technologies instantly, because that has always been such a pain. When I got into the world of technology back when I was like, or at least this kind of like new technology back when I was like 11, when we had IBM Bluemix, I had that luxury of being able to work with a cloud environment, even if it wasn't as evolved as it is today. And so when I look back, I start to wonder, how did developers really work without things like, Bluemix and IBM Cloud and all these different services, right? So it kind of surprises me that we used to be able to live without these new sort of ways of working with tech. And so on that note, let's talk a little bit more about enterprise. Now, traditionally, developers have seen these sorts of larger companies, things like, for example, banks or airlines, as slower moving and sort of organizations that take longer to adapt to newer technologies. For example, cloud might be one of them. So could you maybe tell me a little bit more about some of the unique challenges of applying cloud at that scale versus just like with a small business or a startup, and what we're actually doing to solve those challenges?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, I recall going through this journey for cloud. You go back, 7 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that. And talking, I remember presenting about cloud is going to be the future, and a lot of people in the audience were like, "No way, my data is not going to ever move to the cloud, right?" And you fast forward now and look where we are, right? So there's a huge adoption of public cloud. But to your point about enterprise and some of these large corporations, the one of the main challenges from their perspective is again about trust and security, right? Compliance of some of the applications on a public cloud environment. There's still a lot of work that we need to do to ensure that we are providing a safe environment, and we are doing that. But it does take time for one, the trust level from these corporations, and two, building out the technology to the point where it's seamless and it's easy to do. What we're doing as a company, I mean, IBM has always been building enterprise technology for these enterprise companies, and so they do have a lot of trust in us. And the reason they do that is because we do build our technology in such a way where we're providing the right tool set. We're providing trust, and I can talk about AI and trust. Not sure if you covered it on the show before, but we're doing a lot of work around making sure that we have bias detection, right? You want to be able to provide explainability of your AI models. How did that decision get made? Why did it get made? And explain how, the kind of the life of that decision, so that in an enterprise audit type of situation, you're able to provide an answer on why that decision was made, right? But security overall, I mean, you talk about the different compliance levels for the cloud, as well as the applications and the services that are running on the cloud. All that needs to be part of that overall end story of being able to move your data to a cloud so that you feel that level of trust. So we're doing a lot in that space. And again, customers know us for that. And we're doing a lot to work with them to make sure that they have the right level of security, for example, to be able to feel comfortable as they move these workloads to the cloud.
Right. Okay. So one thing that came up a lot was the word data, and I feel like that's really interesting. So I want to cover that more, but really quickly before I do continue, I want to say again, if there are any questions from the live stream, feel free to ask them, in the live stream chat, and we'll go ahead and cover them. I do see one from Michael that we'll go ahead and cover in just a moment. Actually, we might as well do that now. And Michael's question is, how does the purchase of Red Hat fit into IBM's vision of hybrid cloud?
Yeah, great question. And when I found out about the Red Hat acquisition at $34 billion a few years ago, was like, wow, and everything. That's like the most expensive acquisition ever. Is it really worth it? What's it going to do for us? And as we're working through it, it was an absolutely amazing move by Arvind, who's our CEO. And the way it's helping is it's helping us to provide an open platform where, again, Kubernetes containerization, being able to build our applications in a way that they can run anywhere. One of our overall key strategies is hybrid cloud, which means that we are going to support any environment irrelevant of where the data is. And OpenShift allows us to do that. So we're supporting all our applications on top of OpenShift. OpenShift runs anywhere, and we're able to now deploy our applications to where the data is to be able to run any type of workload. So that's how it's fitting into our overall strategy. It's 100% the right way of providing this level of abstraction as you move across the workloads. And we can get into more exactly what we're doing there, but that is the reason why it's critical for us.
Right, I absolutely love that because it ties into two things that we've talked about before on the show. First of all, we've talked to Ruchir Puri, the chief scientist at IBM Research, and one of his main sort of points was that data fundamentally has more gravity than algorithms or the services on top of it. And so whenever we see, different like complex machine learning algorithms that we use to derive insight from data, a lot of the times we're actually moving the algorithms to be where the data is and not the other way around, right? And so this sort of capability enables that to happen. And also at the same time sort of goes to Leo's point from last week's episode, CTO of Nimbix, where we talked about the fact that with this technology, cloud providers are now sort of forced to provide innovation on top of just the compute that they provide, right? Because pretty much every cloud provider, even you could set up your own infrastructure, right? The innovation then happens on top of that with the services they're giving you that are then actually unique. As a matter of fact, I actually want to dive a little bit deeper into that point around data and sort of AI. And I know that cloud computing, this is something that I've sort of mentioned in this context before, but I had a talk a little while ago, actually a couple of years ago, where the title was not data, cloud and AI, two sides of the same coin, right? Because at the end of the day, right, they both help each other in a lot of ways. And
100%.
so I wanted a little bit more about how exactly, IBM or what sort of experience you have of seeing the two sort of intertwine and what kind of capabilities you get working with both in the same stack that you couldn't if you didn't have them sort of intertwined that way.
Yeah, so actually, a lot of the things you mentioned fall right into place with each other. So obviously, cloud is our delivery mechanism of our technology. AI is the 100% the way we believe you need to modernize and disrupt. If you any industry that you're talking about, whether it's banking, whether it's insurance, retail, right? All of those are essentially disrupting, and the way that disruption is happening is by leveraging AI. As they're modernizing their applications and their microservice cloud native applications, they're figuring out, okay, these pieces of my solution can now exist on a public cloud, this one will have to stay on my private cloud, and I want to do AI on both of those to make sure I bring value to my clients, and I also can get ahead of my competition, right? So these go very well hand in hand in terms of I need to be able to disrupt. To do that, I need to modernize. I modernize on the cloud. I leverage the AI technology that is available on the cloud so that I can disrupt the business that I'm in, myself and the competitors as well. So that's how they kind of fit in together. It's naturally happening on its own, but for people like us who've been envisioning this, it's cool that it's coming together so that we're seeing that our vision was correct, and now we're executing to it. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I can imagine how nice it must be to actually see that sort of vision that you've had actually start sort of working out so naturally, the pieces sort of fitting together. One thing that in specific really interests me is that, of course, as you mentioned, cloud and AI are sort of like a natural fit, and it sort of makes sense that these AI solutions would gravitate towards the cloud. But I feel like there's a lot that you can actually accomplish if you architect solutions with the intent of being put on the cloud, right? Actually, specifically well optimized to do that sort of vertical integration in that sense, right? I mean, there's all sorts of examples of this in the industry. One of the sort of I feel like most popular new ones that a lot of consumers can relate to would be, say, the new Apple Silicon chips, right? The fact that everything is now just working together, right? All the different hardware-specific acceleration, GPU, CPU, the unified memory architecture, the operating system. The fact that everything kind of works together makes it so it's a much better Mac in a lot of small ways than the previous ones. Similarly, with a lot of these solutions, especially, for example, with that purchase of Red Hat, all these little things sort of adding up to a much better solution, which then sort of enables innovation on top of that, right? We talked to the CEO and CTOs of Julia Computing a little while ago on the show, and we were talking about how compiler technology, which is something that's usually very far away removed from a consumer, actually really impacts them, because then when developers have better tools, they can create better solutions for those consumers, right? So it sort of ties back into that. Now, I do also want to ask you a quick question from the live stream. This one's from Shiva. And she's asking, well, this is a bit of a different topic, but what fascinates you most about working in the field of cloud computing?
Again, it's the amazing things that you can do with it, right? I mentioned already the environments that it creates for developers, but not only for developers, but for applications. Let's imagine, I mean, startups love the cloud, right? If you're starting a new business, I remember you go back 10 years ago. I mean, there was so much that needed to be done. If you're a founder or kind of your CEO of your own company, you need to look at all these angles. You need the infrastructure, you need the applications, the tool set. You bring in developers, you bring in marketing, you bring in sales. Everything has to be set up from scratch. With the cloud, if you're a startup right now, it's so easy. You could get everything up and running probably within a week.
Mm-hmm.
Within a week, you can have a running business with all the components already in place. And all it is a click away for you to stand them up. Like, honestly, it's that quick. Not only that though, that's from the technology perspective, but then from the cost perspective, right? In the past, again, you would have to buy licenses for these tools. You would have to buy the hardware for the infrastructure. Now it's what, $1 a day or $1 a month or something for these things. It's like unbelievably cheap. And again, you can have a business up and running essentially little to no cost. And you can start concentrating on what's important, which is what you're trying to deliver to your users or your customers, right? It's a huge transformation. That's so you got developers, you got the startups, and for the enterprise, again, this is the place where they go to see the disruption. They're seeking cloud and AI to disrupt the environment and the business that they're in. They see this as the way forward. And yes, there is concerns about security, trust, but I think the value is outweighing that, and having the right tools and the right policies in place and security procedures in place. It's proving that this is going to continue to happen, and it will drive this type of transformation. So it's really cool.
Speaking of security, actually, I want to pick up on that point, because there is a really interesting question from Kishan on the live stream. Well, there's actually two questions. So I'm going to start off with one that's slightly unrelated, then we'll get to the security one. His first question is, and I'm not sure if you would know this off the top of your head, but which US company stores the most data in the cloud?
I actually don't know this off the top of my head. So it's so when we talk about cloud, there are different type of clouds, right?
Yeah.
So there's public cloud, there's hybrid cloud, there's private clouds. So it depends which angle you're looking at. But I can tell you, as IBM, we have our overall strategy is hybrid cloud, and that entails, like, if we look at the largest banks, the largest enterprises, or largest retailers in the world, and insurance companies in the world, they're running in a private cloud environment, right? So I would argue that we have the most data in the cloud. It's not a cloud as when people think cloud, they think it's public cloud, but that's just one portion of it. And I actually argue that it's not the most important for us. And hence, our overall strategy is really about hybrid cloud, which we can talk more about. But that's where we see the future, at least for the next 10 to 20 years.
Right. Okay. So we will be diving deeper into hybrid cloud. There are actually a couple questions on that. First, though, I do want to ask a question about security from Kishan. He's asking, apart from the one that I did ask already, do you think endpoint security is best handled by a cloud-enabled solution?
That's a good question. I think It's hard to say. At the end of the day, you want to go with a cloud provider that gives you. Are you drinking vodka there?
No, this is water.
um, you want to go with the cloud provider that provides it has reputation for providing the best security, right? And that's not hard to figure out. But I think you need security at all levels. You can never be too secure. If you're talking with edge devices, IoT devices, you need to be able to provide the right level of security there. Excuse me. You need security at the networking layer. You need the security at the cloud layer, at different layers within the cloud itself. You cannot be too secure in today's world. I mean, the pandemic has brought so much more fraud and leveraging technology to do that. It's unbelievable, right? There's always these people are always looking for ways to find loopholes into the system. And with the pandemic hitting, it's provided more and more of that for them. And we need to make sure that security is happening at every single layer. I mean, you talked about developers as well. Developers need to make sure that they're writing code in a secure fashion, right? We have tool sets and policies in place and guidelines for developers as well to ensure that that's happening. So I strongly believe it's equally important across the entire stack. Obviously, as you're onboarding your data into a cloud environment, potentially a public cloud environment, you need to make sure that that vendor has the highest level of security protocols in place.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it's very case specific. You can't just generally say that it's best handled by a cloud enabled solution. And of course, it also is. Security has to be at every point in the pipeline, right? You can't just have it at one point. So yeah, no, that does make sense. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions,
I was going to add. I'm not sure if you heard, but there are new ways now of fraud taking place, right? And you think of IoT devices, mm-hmm. Things like IoT in cars, or even things like pacemakers, right? These hackers are getting into these technologies now, into these devices, and then requesting ransom for them being able to essentially shut these devices off, mm-hmm. right? So there are so much. That's why when we talk about security, it has to be at every single point in the stack. No doubt.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've done a couple episodes on cybersecurity, and one of the sort of main themes, there are two main themes, right? And they are that, first of all, everything keeps evolving, right? It's an adversarial game, right?
Yeah.
Every single time you have better defenses, there's going to be someone that figures something out, right? Yeah. I feel like one of the funniest things that I've seen in cybersecurity world, the Apple kernel for all their operating systems, XNU, is actually open source on GitHub. And one of these very well-known sort of members of the iOS jailbreaking community submitted a joke PR to the kernel, where he was like, "Oh, we improved the performance of the kernel by modifying a few core subroutines, but actually just reintroduced the same vulnerability that Apple patched in the previous commit." Yeah. And that's just a joke, right? But there's always going to be people figuring out new ways to do all sorts of things from all sorts of different ways. And so, first of all, we got to keep evolving. And plus, a lot of the time, cybersecurity is more of a human thing than it is a technology thing, right? Technology is pretty secure, and it's humans that actually interact with it, that have access to do things with it, that end up introducing a lot of vulnerabilities. We can't patch people. We can only really patch tech. So that's also important to keep in mind. But there is another question here, and now we can finally get a little bit more into hybrid cloud. I want to start off with a question from Shiva really quickly before we get into one from Cecily. So Shiva's asking, we mentioned hybrid cloud. How's that related to cloud migration?
Okay, so again, good question. So if I look at where most companies are, especially the enterprises, right? If you're a startup, you're probably going to start it up on a public cloud. There's no reason for you not to. But if you're a large enterprise that's been around for 20, 50, 100 years even, right? And we have those clients. You're looking at modernization, and you're looking at modernization from many different angles, including a cloud and where do you end up, right? As I said before, there's still a lot. it's going to take years, and it may never happen, where you think of the largest bank taking all their applications and all their data and say, okay, I'm going to move them onto the public cloud, right? I don't think, definitely not in the short term. And as we talk to those clients, they're basically saying, yeah, we're reviewing, as an example, I have 1,000 applications. I'm reviewing which ones are best suited for a public cloud, but the rest is more of a hybrid cloud. And hybrid cloud is actually a broad term, but that means that it could be a combination of private cloud with public cloud, right? Or it could be, it's a multi-cloud environment. It could be that IBM Cloud or other cloud vendors like Amazon or Microsoft or Google, right? But clients who have decided where their data is going to go, for the ones that they feel are ready to go in a public cloud environment, now you have that's part of our overall hybrid cloud strategy, is being able to interconnect those so that your application can run across the board, right? Because most companies are not going to be on one cloud. In fact, we already know that. They're going to be on at least 2 or 3 clouds, which means private cloud and maybe 1 to 2 or even 3 public cloud vendors. So that's your point earlier about data gravity. That's where it really comes in terms of being able to bring our tool set to where the data is. So as these companies are looking to modernization for them right now, I feel there's probably 10 to 15 year window where they're going to be on a hybrid cloud environment, which means they'll slowly progress which applications they feel are ready for a public cloud, but the rest will continue to modernize in a private cloud environment that they feel more secure with, right? So it's going to be a mixed environment for quite a while still before we get to see, and maybe we'll never get to see fully public cloud, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. There are lots of use cases where there's, weird restrictions from different angles, right? I mean, I've worked on projects like, for example, in mental health, where, there'll be a data set in New Zealand with a lot of like personally identifiable information, and there's very specific data centers you can store the data in, and sometimes you're just not allowed to use the data in the first place because I'm over here in Canada trying to access data in New Zealand, and there's that's just one example. Then you've got, like, I mean, we've mentioned banks. There's also retailers, right? Walmart is very much hybrid cloud, right? They have lots of their own infrastructure, a lot of their own infrastructure, more than you would imagine, more than you would think a grocery chain would have. I'll say that much. I visited their headquarters and started to realize they're less of a grocery company than they are a technology company. But at the same time, they're using a lot of public cloud as well, right? And so you're right. This sort of transition phase is where hybrid cloud is most useful. And who knows? Maybe we won't ever see the day of 100% public cloud, but I can see us getting higher and higher saturation in public cloud just because of the convenience and the innovation and the speed that you get working there. But it'll take time.
I think one of the things that's transitioning is, if you think of a public cloud right now, what you like the best about a public cloud is the fact that everything comes as a managed service, right? So you don't have to have your own IT team or infrastructure. It's provided for you and managed on your behalf. One of the things that we're driving towards when we talk about hybrid cloud, as IBM, we're saying we're going to provide a managed environment, not only on the public cloud, but also on a private cloud. So overall, in a hybrid cloud environment, you can actually run data and applications on your private cloud environment that will be managed by IBM. That is a very different thing that I think most companies either don't know is something we're going towards, or that's where the future, I believe, will also go. So there's a lot happening in that space, and Red Hat and OpenShift is a key foundation for that.
Very nice. I feel like that's actually really interesting because we are getting a question about that from Sachin on the live stream.
All right.
And yeah, I mean, first of all, to your point about multi-cloud, I feel like maybe the prime example, the one that, again, a lot of people can sort of relate to, is actually, we're going to go back to Apple for this one. For iCloud, right? If you buy iCloud storage, you're not just storing that on Apple data centers, you're storing that on Apple data centers and 3 other cloud providers, right? So a lot of different companies not only want that hybrid cloud approach, like, for example, Walmart's doing, but even a multi-cloud approach, right? So there's all different approaches here. And Sachin actually has a question about that, saying, with the kinds of dependencies that cloud providers push, what is your take on making it easy and democratic for enterprises to embrace multi-cloud?
Yeah. 100%. So we're doing a lot here. I mean, I actually feel like we've been leading the hybrid cloud. It makes sense for us. It's the right strategy for us. We're doing a lot of things. So the acquisition of Red Hat to provide this level of abstraction and portability across the different worlds between private cloud, public cloud, and multi-cloud. That is one key step that we've taken. The other one is we're modernizing our solutions. In fact, there is, if you kept up with IBM a little bit earlier this year at our Think conference, which was virtual, we announced IBM Satellite solution. And what Satellite does, again, leverages OpenShift, but it allows us to deploy our tool set on the cloud in anywhere, which means that, for example, let's take our IBM Watson Studio technology to be able to build machine learning models, or Watson Machine Learning to be able to deploy those models. I can run it on Amazon or Microsoft or Google Cloud by leveraging this tool called Satellite. So I don't have to go and re-architect all my services, all my solutions to natively support them on those different cloud vendors. But what I can do is leverage Satellite, which uses OpenShift, to be able to actually deploy them there without me having to do the work. So they're still running natively on those clouds, but not, I didn't have to go and reinvent or re-architect my application to be able to do that. It's a huge value proposition, great time saver. I mean, if we have to go and support every single cloud for every service, it would take us many years to do all that work as a development team, and also as it's more than just the actual technical part of it. But Satellite enables us to do that. So there are many steps like that that we've taken to be able to provide this type of tool set to make it easier for our customers. Yeah, so I feel we're already there, by the way. So the Satellite offering is available as a beta right now. I know we're not selling anything on this show, but it is available today. So it's not like we're talking about something that we're dreaming about. It's actually working today, and you can do that, and you can actually try it out. So it's pretty cool.
It's very nice. I mean, I feel like it's always better if we can say the technology is here today and not like, oh yeah, we're going to see it in the future,
Yeah.
right? Of course, we are going to see a lot of evolution in the future, but it's nice to know that we actually have access to the tech today. All right. Now there is a pretty fun question from Shiva, but I want to get to that in just a moment. First, let's get another question from Tassin. So Tassin's asking, did this pandemic incur any change in the field of cloud computing? So how has cloud been forced to change thanks to the pandemic, or how has it even helped us maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you probably have been keeping up with the news on what this has done, but this has 100% accelerated the transformation, the modernization to cloud, right? And we're hearing that from different vendors. We're noticing ourselves as well. But if I look at how it's changed things, so we work again. If I look at the large enterprises, right, we spend a lot of time with them. And before the pandemic was hitting, you would get a lot of users would be essentially standing up their own infrastructure still on a private cloud environment, right? That may mean even in a lot of cases, we have a lot of technology we sell still, which brings the hardware into their data centers as well, and still running the latest cloud native technology, but it's inside the private cloud. Well, with the pandemic hitting, they haven't been able to do that. Nobody's in the office, right? Even accepting the delivery of our servers coming into their environment is not happening that seamlessly anymore. So what that has done is, for those that were hesitant about going to trying things on a public cloud, now we saw a huge spike where these teams that were doing AI or their own modernization transformation around data or governance or you name it, they're actually trying our technology on the cloud, and they're onboarding from there as opposed to waiting for their private cloud environment to be set up. So that's really accelerating. And then with the remote way of working right now and the new companies that are popping up everywhere, it's really been driving more adoption to the cloud. Everybody's just going there. I'll give a quick analogy. Like if you think about a lot of users, so I mean, most people probably in North America have bought on Amazon, something on Amazon. But when you looked at a lot of users, especially the elderly, they were hesitant about shopping online, right? It's something they knew about. A lot of people did it, but it wasn't full blown. Everybody was buying online. including grocery shopping, right? And the pandemic has really forced that. Now, if, if you live in a subdivision like I do and you look outside, you can probably count every 2 to 3 minutes there's a delivery truck delivering something from Amazon or Walmart or groceries that are being delivered, right? It's not acceleration. I think is an understatement. It's totally like changed everything there. The same thing is happening for the enterprise. So that's the analogy that I like to use. The same thing has happened there, where these users are now really reaching out to, okay, I can't do it in the office like I was before. I really need to do it remotely on the cloud. That's the fastest way to do it. Let me go ahead and do that, right? So we're seeing that type of transformation.
Right. That's really fun because it ties perfectly into a vision that Joe Speed had, the field CTO at AD-Link, on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he said that with COVID and this whole pandemic, we haven't necessarily changed a lot of the things that we're innovating. Of course, there's some new innovations coming up, but for the most part, what we've done is we've completely messed with the timescales. Some things that were going to take many years have been done in weeks, and some things that would have been done in days have now been, delayed till years. And so the timescales have been completely, skewed due to the pandemic because our priorities have changed, right? When priorities change, different technologies, different fundamental innovations are going to happen in order to account for larger innovation or even just changing environments, right? And so that completely makes sense. I love how that sort of fit in with what he said a little while ago as well.
Awesome.
So there is another really interesting question. This one is from Praveen. Let's see over here. I'm just making sure this is the one. No, this one's from Cecily. Okay, so Cecily's asking, how does cloud computing factor into application strategy and architecture?
Yeah, so it's kind of what we talked about already. If you're building an application, you want the most modern tool set to be able to do that. That modern tool set is on the cloud. Again, building out an application, I mean, it's evolved over the years so much, right? And even programming languages and the packages that are available, and with the evolution of open source, one of the things that is critical and important about cloud is that it's also leveraging a lot of the open source technology. For a company like IBM, and what we do is we actually leverage that open source technology on the cloud. We transform it and make it secure. So we wrap around it to be able to provide a secure enterprise environment. So that allows the enterprise customers to be able to get the best of both worlds, right? They have their developers and skills in Python or R or whatever language, and instead of us re-implementing something that we feel secure, we're taking that so that they don't have to relearn new skill sets, and we're adding the layers on top of it that make it a true enterprise solution. That is then delivered on the cloud, and this is how these other users now are leveraging the cloud as a new strategy as they're building out their own application or potentially modernizing their own applications.
Right, that makes sense, right? It's cloud makes it a lot easier to be able to architect these sorts of complex applications. All right, now there's a question from Deep, and I think this one's interesting because it's a contrast to what we've been talking about so
All
far.
right.
We've been talking a lot about the great stuff about cloud computing. He's asking, what are some of the general problems with cloud? What are some of the downsides, the disadvantages?
Um, I think one of the things that I've noticed is you always have to do your research. If if you look at some applications that are running on public clouds or even some of the cloud vendors themselves, one of the big value propositions around cloud is very cost effective, right? Um, I think we have started to see some scenarios where, especially if you're a large company, potentially would have been cheaper if you had done it yourself in a private cloud environment, right? So there's this amazing carrot at the beginning, which is true when you're starting small, but as you grow and as you leverage more of the computing and the storage and everything else, um, it can get expensive. So you have to be careful and do your research on how you're investing, where you're investing, making sure you understand the pricing models and all of that, and the return on investment that you're going to get. That's critical. So that's one that I would say has come up a few times.
I mean, I can imagine that as you scale to like really, really large, instances and just generally, scales of application on the cloud, right? There would be there would be a point where certain infrastructure would make more sense for you to have on your own, right?
Yeah.
And
I'll give you a perfect example. I won't mention who the companies. There's been a few companies that have done this. They had made it so easy for their different units and developers to access cloud environments where they could just go and spin up. They would have their credentials and just spin up new environments, right? To the point where it had gotten so out of hand because like anything, you need a process around it, right? But they had posters in the elevators. Do not stand up in your environment unless you have, So now they were totally paranoid and wanted to make sure that everyone followed the right process and were able to manage it because it actually turned out to be more costly than they ever anticipated. So yeah, it's a few examples like that for sure.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine that without a process, all the developers would be like, "Oh, environment, that looks like it's for me."
Yes. Yep.
So, yeah, I can imagine, right? At an individual developer scale, sure, whatever. But then when scale that to an entire large enterprise, that adds up to a lot of money. So yeah, you
Yep.
got
100%.
got gotta make sure that's something you figure out. But yeah, no, that's definitely really interesting. Now there is a comment from Praveen, and maybe you want to comment on this. It's not necessarily a question. He's saying, "I'm no expert, but I guess integrating private and public clouds can be a nightmare. Reminds me of Google Anthos. Never heard of Anthos, but regardless, maybe you have. And what do you want to say to that? Any tools or sort of, yeah,
Yeah, actually, that's a great point, and I think it depends on the tool set that you use, right? So again, I go back to OpenShift. We're containerizing all our applications to be able to run them on OpenShift. It creates an abstraction layer. It creates the right environment, the right security. Um, Hybrid cloud for us really means that the vision is if you're a developer or any type of user, you'll get on the application or the tool set that you're trying to use, and you won't know or care where it's running. You don't have to worry about that. Are there challenges? Yes, of course. But what we are doing is we're actually the way we're architecting our solutions is it's the same code base with a little bit of abstraction at the bottom, which it doesn't matter where the application is running, and it doesn't matter where the data is. We're bringing the technology to where the data is. So in a sense, we are taking all the hard work to make sure that we are enabling developers and application users to run in a hybrid cloud environment. We're doing all that work to ensure that you don't have to worry about it. And so I think it's actually pretty easy to do already today. But there are some scenarios like, if you really want to get to a true hybrid where you don't know where it's running, you don't care, it's all being managed for you under the covers, we're not quite there yet, but we're well on our way to achieve that goal. So 100%, it's not easy, but we're doing a lot of the grunt work as well.
yeah, I can see, from the experiences that I have working with a lot of these different tools that we build, that we're definitely working on making it easier, is what I can say. We're not there yet where it's just completely autonomous and it's all sort of laid out well for you. But that's what the industry generally is trying to work towards, and I feel like IBM specifically with a lot of the tools is really trying to push for. So
Yeah, I can give an example if you don't mind. I mean,
definitely.
if I look at Cloud Pak for Data, for example, which if for those of you who don't know what it is, it's really a platform for us to be able to drive or manage the entire end-to-end life cycle of data from all the way to access, to governance, to then building AI, and to operationalizing AI. That technology for us is available on private cloud, it's available on-prem, it's available on public cloud, and now it's being made available for multi-cloud, as I said, through satellite. That is, most of the code is exactly the same code running in all these different environments. And the idea there is that, again, to the point, you don't have to worry about where things are running. You're going to see the same experience, the same capability, the exact same tool set. And the way we've architected that solution is you have a concept of a project. A project is really collaboration between different personas, whether you're a data scientist, line of business user, to be able to work together, right? That project is essentially going to be a common project across the different cloud environments where you don't have to worry or know where the assets in that project are. There's a collaboration across different users, and those could be on different cloud environments as well as private cloud, and it will all work seamlessly together. So just as an example.
Seamless is the key word there. I love it. Hybrid and multi-cloud, right? It's trying to make this as easy as possible for everybody. All right, now the fun question from Shiva I was talking about. So this is a slightly modified version of her question, but she says, would you like to share your experiences, so sweet, bitter, or both, you had while working as lab director?
Oh, okay. I mean, there's always challenges.
Yeah.
Without getting into too much detail. As a lab director, my job is to ensure that everyone feels good about working at our lab within IBM. I want to make sure people are feeling rewarded. They're empowered to do what they need to do, how to do their job successfully. And also, more importantly, provide an environment where innovation can thrive and kind of be born through the environment that we create. Those are the good things. I want people to feel rewarded, both challenged technically as well as monetary rewards. So there are many challenges which I have to. My job is to hide all of those things from all the developers working there. Nobody has an endless bucket of money that for example, that you can go and or a printing machine that you can go and print money. So we have to manage that, right? Those things are challenging, but what makes it worth it is being able to achieve some of those goals, maybe not all, but and then be able to reward people for what they're doing. Um, so challenging, yes. Rewarding, 100%. That's just one example. Around innovation, the same thing, right? And Tanmay, you may have heard me talk about some of these things, but we have such a large environment of developers within IBM across Canada, and everyone's working on their own offering, and how do we get them to collaborate together. Those are challenging things, but again, fun things to do. We can do that, bring those teams together through fun activities, hackathons, right? Enablement and sharing of information, also collaborating on innovation projects. All of those things are key to get teams to work together. So challenging, yes, lots of different challenges. Rewarding is what I would say is the best part of this job.
Yeah, it's good to know that it's at least rewarding, and it's nice to hear those experiences. I mean, the snacks are great, I will say.
Those were not easy to get, but it was good.
Yeah, no, I gotta say it's very well appreciated by everybody at the lab.
Awesome.
All right, yeah. So that's thank you for the question, Shiva. Now there's a question that I have for you. So this one's a little bit further removed from the world of cloud, but it still sort of ties into it. And that is, I want to talk a little bit about, before I get to that actually, as I mentioned, some people view enterprises as these very large, slow-moving ships, right? And
Yes.
one of those technologies that people stereotypically associate with like really old companies that just don't want to migrate their systems is mainframes.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that I have for you is, what is the role of mainframe technology in an environment like today's, where we have the cloud and we have more distributed systems versus centralized, really powerful systems, and how does that tie into your hybrid cloud strategy?
Actually, great question. So we're doing a lot there. So first of all, mainframe today, after 50 plus years, is still the most powerful, reliable, secure system in the world. There's nothing yet after 50 years that has come close to that. I don't know if you know, but we actually use mainframe on the cloud for some of our technologies. Blockchain technology, for example, it's running on mainframe on IBM Cloud. Um, Having said that, 80 to 90% of the most critical workloads in the world, and that, when you think that, you think of healthcare, you think of government, you think of your bank and your funds, all of those things. 80 to 90% of all the critical workloads in the world are still running on the mainframe. What are we doing about that? We are mainframe is not dead, unlike people think. We renew new versions of it every couple of years, and every couple of years we make huge strides into making it better and more powerful and more secure. But also, we acknowledge the fact that there is a whole new world out there with public cloud and private cloud that is on a distributed environment, right? So we made a lot of strides and we put in a lot of work to make sure that we can bridge the mainframe world with a hybrid cloud world. And specifically, there are a couple of technologies that we released this year, for example. One is called Datagate, which allows data on the mainframe to be available on a distributed system as well. In fact, that system is going to be running Cloud Pak for Data. And then you can actually run your applications on data that exists on the mainframe through Datagate to be able to. So now you're essentially providing all the modern tool sets, let's call them, to developers where the data exists on the mainframe. So anyways, without making a long story short, there's a ton of work here that we have done to make sure that we're bridging those two worlds together, because mainframe will not go away tomorrow. Once we get to maybe 20% of the most critical workloads, I can see how that, but we're not there, and there's no trend that's showing that we're going to get there anytime soon. So yeah, it's very exciting actually.
Very nice to hear, because I gotta say, as a developer, I'm really fascinated, especially being fascinated by like more lower level tech, about the kind of tech that goes behind mainframes and stuff. So it's good to hear that they're not going away anytime soon. I feel like that's something that's almost fun for people to say. Is for many years now, people have been like, the mainframe's dead. The next year, the mainframe is still dead, but it's not. So
yeah, in fact, I don't know if you know, but IBM has taken a huge step in porting a lot of the open source technologies right on the mainframe. So they're actually running on the mainframe. You can do Python on the mainframe, right?
That is incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible.
Yeah, it's well, it would be fun to actually, we should do another episode of Tech Life Skills, a more technical one. Actually, have a mainframe that we get access to and do like a more technical deep dive into it. We should arrange for that.
Absolutely.
I'll look into that. That would be fun. All right, no, but apart from that, now I do want to ask a little bit more about some other technologies. Now, we did talk a little bit about AI and how that ties into cloud, and you talked about cloud being this sort of platform to deliver technologies. And I feel like that's a great analogy, because it's not just AI, right? It's all these different technologies. You mentioned blockchain, there's even quantum computing now, right? Like the IBM Q experience. Technically, there's quantum computers in the cloud, right? You could say. And so all these different technologies can now be delivered through this cloud platform. Do you have any like maybe examples or maybe case studies that you could share of some really interesting things that companies have been able to do by using next generation technologies in the cloud? Things like, blockchain, AI, IoT, whatever it may be.
I mean, there's a ton of examples, right? So our cloud, just like the other cloud vendors, supports a ton of technology. You look at the catalog, and some of them say it's hard to find stuff because there's so much of it. But the ones I can at least talk about very, very openly is, again, around AI. If I look at some of the, whether you're looking at churn or whether you're looking at fraud detection, whether you're looking at automation of insurance and claims. I mean, those are all great examples on how AI has helped and how cloud has helped drive some of those disruptions in each of those markets, right? Blockchain, of course, as well. I mean, you name it. We at IBM Cloud, we have all our key solutions are being migrated there. In fact, probably 90 or more % of them are already there, and they have been there for a while. Yeah, I think, like I said before, anyone starting new or modernizing their solution, they should be looking at cloud as a first step, and then see how that fits into our overall strategy. We believe, again, for enterprise hybrid cloud is the strategy. And we know that's true because the other vendors are following what we're doing. So I always get satisfaction out of that.
Yeah, it's you can tell that what you're doing is right, because everybody else is going to also start doing similar stuff to
Exactly.
to what you're doing, right? All right, now there is one more question from Somnath. This one's actually pretty far removed from the technology, more towards how people can learn about the technology. And of course, there are lots of different resources about technology online. Somnath's question is a bit more specific to the way you learn. So he's saying, every few days there's something new in the world of technology that comes up. So how do you stick to something and actually learn that topic through and through. So any advice as to different resources that people can use or different methods that people can use to learn about these sorts of technologies?
Yeah, I feel like that question is to me, at least I'll answer it the way I do things is everyone's different. Everyone has a different learning style or keeping current in a different way. The way I like to do things, I don't know if you knew, but I was a developer when I first started for many years. So I still like to learn by doing. And I go and try out the services or I try out the technology and I play with it and I find out what's good, what's not good. I read about it as well, but I love getting my hands dirty and understanding how technology works. So that's one way I keep doing that. I mean, there's in terms of how others can stay current. I mean, there's news, there's the conferences, although virtual. It's I know it's harder to attend them virtually, but there's still a ton. Things like this. I mean, on YouTube now, there's a lot of this information being distributed. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. Subscribe to the things that you're interested in and follow them. I mean, uh, things like Medium to be able to access information and get stay current. All of those things are valid. On IBM, obviously, we have our own methods and blogging and tools that we distribute information through. But it is what I would say. It's probably a different experience or way of doing things for every individual based on how each individual learns. So I know I like to learn by doing. So I dive right in there.
That's a developer habit that will never die, and I feel like it's
It
it's
will
really
never
fun.
die.
It never does. Learning by doing is always fun. Sometimes it almost seems counterintuitive to someone looking in from the outside that isn't a developer. It's like if you could read the documentation in 20 minutes and figure it out, why didn't you experiment with it for 2 days? But there's something else about just trying out random API calls and seeing what sticks that you just don't get from documentation. So,
Exactly. But
so
we
yeah,
learn better that way. I still
yeah,
believe.
exactly, exactly. And as you mentioned, everyone learns differently. You mentioned some great resources, YouTube. Medium is a great way to get started. I know that people learn differently, so not just my YouTube. I conveniently also happen to have my book on Watson here as well, which I actually
Awesome.
co-wrote with Rob High, CTO of IBM Watson, or former CTO at IBM Watson. So do check that out if you're interested in using AI on the cloud without having to learn how the AI actually works. And I feel like that's also one of the other that's a good segue into one of the other advantages of this cloud technology is it's very easy for an organization like, for example, IBM to then go ahead and package together different services like the Watson APIs and say, all right, you can just do an API call to the public cloud, and suddenly you no longer need to, fine tune BERT for sentiment recognition yourself. You can just make a call to Watson NLU, and suddenly it's done for you. And
100%.
so I feel like that's another one of the great advantages of being able to have a cloud environment is the delivery of those services.
Yeah, 100%. And not only IBM can do it, because we provide the services and they're available for any developer,
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy for them to do it as well. But we do try to provide a better experience. What we call them is fit for purpose experiences to be able to, cater the tool set to specific personas who need to do a specific job. And we help them through it and we help them do that. And we leverage all our tools under the cover. So it's awesome. I
Wonderful.
don't know if you heard of Watson for Citizens, Watson Assistant for Citizens. So this is when the pandemic hit, we really leveraged our Watson technology, not only a chatbot, but also you're able to stand up this tool within a couple of days. A lot of the major cities around the world stood this up for the pandemic to be able to provide an interface for all these panicked citizens around the world in terms of finding out how is the pandemic hitting us, or how many numbers, what are the cases, where do I get help, like. And we've done this for a lot of our customers. Government agencies obviously are key customers of ours, and we stood this up just like you described. We stitched things together and we provided an interface where each of these different municipalities or whatever stood these up and able to field a lot of the questions are coming from distressed and panicked citizens about what was going on with the pandemic, right? It's been a huge tool that it's really transformed and helped the world in this case. So it's awesome to see.
I mean, I feel like that's so nice that something that, to think that a couple of years ago we barely had natural language understanding technology, and now it's so accessible that right as the pandemic hits, someone can just go and start working with Watson and just get some of these systems up and running, and that has such an impact, right? Because especially in a situation like a pandemic, clicking buttons and turning dials on a computer screen doesn't feel as genuine as being able to talk to a chatbot. And it's not even just that, right? The integrations that it has with all these other different systems to be able to get people to know about the actual situation, I feel like that makes so much more sense, right?
Yeah.
It's really nice to see the kind of impact that has. Now, there's another question from Tassin, pretty similar to the one that we had just answered from Somnath. He's asking that, cloud computing is a massive field. Any advice for beginners to get started? If there's anything you want to add, Steve, I'd love to hear that. But one more thing I do want to quickly say is that very recently there was a cognitive class.ai course published by a good friend of mine at IBM, Steve Martinelli. So do take a look at that one as well. That is a great course. So I will link that in the description. That can help you get started with IBM Cloud. But yeah, anything else you want to add to that, Steve?
I mean, based on what I said before, go dive right in.
Yeah.
Just go log in, create an account if you haven't already, and you will see the endless possibilities there. There
Absolutely.
are tutorials and walkthroughs of how to do things on the cloud. Make it very simple for you. There's also how-to videos on YouTube. But yeah, dive right in.
Wonderful. Yep. That's what's so nice about this technology is that it lets you dive right in. You just go to
Yep.
ibmcloud.com and start with a light account and sort of get started from there. So yeah,
Yep.
this was really fun discussion. I mean, I've learned I've got a lot of new insight into the world of cloud computing. We talked a little bit about mainframes and how it's fashionable to say the mainframe is dead, but it's not, and we're not seeing that trend happening at all. Hopefully, we can work on some more content around that too. It's really nice to hear your thoughts on the world of hybrid cloud and where the world of cloud is headed in the future for not just small businesses and startups and people that are new to the game, but also enterprises and people that already have decades worth of legacy code and data and infrastructure that now they're thinking, how can we port this over, and what those real advantages are. The fact that when you port it over, not only can you just say that, yeah, we moved to the cloud, but you genuinely do have those new capabilities that you didn't have before, right? I mean, one of my favorite little tidbits from Mike Tibbs on the show a little while ago, who used to be a VP at a Fortune 1 company, he said that he really, really hates the phrase digital transformation. And the reason for that is just because digital transformation means nothing, right? You can transform, but that doesn't mean you transform for the better. so, so
100% true.
yeah, so being able to say that you did digital transformation, right? You went from all of our legacy infrastructure to public cloud, and being able to say that it has, enabled or it has been the catalyst for this innovation or this new stuff that our org is doing, I feel like that's really important. And, different services like IBM Cloud Pak for Data really tie into that, actually making that easier for everyone to do. Hopefully, like I believe Praveen said, hopefully it's no longer that much of a nightmare for people. So yeah, this is a really fun discussion. But before I close it though, Steve, I do want to ask you if there's a closing message that you want to share with our audience.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. It was a great show.
Thank
So I
you.
echo that. I think it's really cool. I mean, I'll recap from our perspective. We're very excited about the current state and where things are going. We have a clear strategy and vision we're executing around hybrid cloud. Multi-cloud is absolutely part of that. Again, I think we're leading here, and we know our vision is right because others are following. So that's really rewarding to see. And the end goal is really to provide the right tool sets for our users. And when you think about a hybrid cloud environment, and we're really tailoring to the enterprise to be able to feel good, secure, having the right technology as they modernize their own applications into a cloud environment. And most importantly is it's about data gravity. We want to be able to bring the tools where the data is. We acknowledge that we're trying to be open, and we acknowledge that customers may have data in different environments, private cloud, public cloud, different cloud vendors on public cloud, and we will support that, and we will support them to making sure they're successful in in their digital transformation.
Digital transformation for the better. It's a power
For the
innovation.
better.
Right. I mean, thank you very much, Steve. This was a really fun discussion. Great having you on the show. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining in today. Of course, I had a lot of fun on today's discussion. Got a lot of good insight. And so make sure you join us next week where we're going to be covering some really fun stuff that I can't talk about just yet, but you'll know more towards the middle of this week. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining in today. Make sure you join us next Sunday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's when Tech Life Skills is held every week, of course. And I will see you next time. So thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.